Shabbat Shalom. I'm Cantor David Proser of Kempsville Conservative Synagogue, Kehillat Bet HaMidrash in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And this is our Torah portion commentary for Shabbat of Saturday, January 9th, 2021, corresponding to the 25th day of the Hebrew month of Tevet in the year 5781. We thank Rabbi Joseph Proser, Rabbi Joyce Newmark, and the United Synagogue Torah Spark series for their various teachings and publications on this week's Parsha. This Shabbat, January 9th, we begin the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot, with the like-named Parsha of Shemot. It begins on page 317 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash and page 206 of the Hertz. We ended last week's Parsha with the death of Joseph, in Egypt. In this week's Parsha, the book of Exodus opens by listing the sons of Yaakov, of Jacob, who have settled in Egypt, and notes the passing of that generation, as well as the rapid increase in Egypt's new Israelite population. At this point, the Torah changes from the story of a family to the story of a people. A new Pharaoh, who the Torah states knew not Joseph, announces his intent to deal shrewdly with the Hebrew minority, which he considers dangerously disloyal. He enslaves them, forcing them to perform harsh labor. Dr. Hertz suggests that this was a monarch of a new dynasty with a nationalist policy, probably Ramses II. Yosef served one of the Hyksos kings, an Asiatic dynasty whose rule in Egypt came centuries before him. Their rule came to an end not long after Yosef's death, when the Hyksos were driven back into Asia and a descendant of the native dynasty regained the throne. In addition to harsh forced labor, Pharaoh devised a genocidal policy toward his slaves, instructing midwives to murder newborn Israelite boys. The midwives, described as God-fearing women, evade the lethal command, claiming that the Hebrews delivered quickly, like animals, before the midwives can arrive, perhaps exploiting Pharaoh's irrational racist fears, and they intervene to prevent the decree being carried out. Significantly, the names of the midwives, Shifra and Puah, are provided in the Torah to honor them in perpetuity. This is notably in contrast to members of Moses' own family, who are not identified by name for several chapters after they are introduced into the narrative. The midwives, first among a series of women to contribute to the Israelite redemption, and more specifically to Moshe's survival, are rewarded by God for their moral principles and their defiance of Pharaoh. Because the midwives would not enforce this order, Pharaoh issues a general order that every baby boy born to Hebrew parents be cast into the Nile. In 10 short verses, we learn of Moshe's birth and infancy, his mother's plan to save him from murder by placing him in a basket at the side of the Nile under his sister's watchful eye, and his adoption and naming by the daughter of Pharaoh, who, unlike her cinematic counterpart, is unnamed in the biblical text. The narrative then jumps several years into the future. A grown-up Moshe goes out to see the state of his people. He comes upon an Egyptian overseer beating an Israelite slave, and he kills the Egyptian. When he realizes that the homicide he had thought was concealed was actually well known, he flees to Midian. There he meets and marries Tzipporah, one of 7 daughters of Jethro, a Midianite priest. Tzipporah bears Moshe the first of 2 sons. During Moshe's time in Midian, Egypt undergoes yet another change in leadership when the Pharaoh dies. God takes note of the suffering of the Israelites and appears to Moshe, now a shepherd in his father-in-law's employ, calling to him from a burning bush. Cryptically identifying himself as Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh, usually translated as I am that I am, God assigns Moshe the role of prophet and the task of leading the Israelites from slavery to freedom in the land that was long ago promised to the patriarchs. A resistant Moshe argues that he is ill-equipped for the prophetic mission. God reassures him and instructs him in a number of miraculous signs to use in establishing divine credibility when he confronts Pharaoh. According to a brief and bizarre interruption in the narrative, while returning to Egypt accompanied by his family, Moshe is attacked by God in a lodging place. According to Dr. Hertz, this was an anthropomorphic way of saying that he fell suddenly into a serious illness. Many commentators connect this illness with the postponement of circumcision of his son. The Hebrew custom is to circumcise on the 8th day. The Bedouin custom was to circumcise at the age of 13. And so Zipporah had put off the circumcision until the child reaches 13. Many others suggest that it was a punishment for doubting his abilities and tarrying too long at the inn, not making haste to get to Egypt. Zipporah, now joining the group of women that includes the midwives, Moshe's mother, sister, and adoptive mother, as rescuers of the chosen Redeemer of Israel, wards off the threat by performing a circumcision of her son with a sharp flint. The illness abated, and he was soon restored to health. The somewhat opaque incident does reveal a menacing side of the divine, a useful foreshadowing of God's devastating actions toward Egypt. God sends Aharon out to meet Moshe, and together they assemble the Israelite elders and tell them that God has promised to end their servitude. Moshe and Aaron's first audience with Pharaoh to demand emancipation of the Israelite slaves angers the monarch, who compounds the harshness endured by the slaves by compelling them to maintain the quota of brickmaking while gathering straw for the process unassisted. Now, hostile Israelites and their foremen complain to Moshe that he has only made matters worse. Appealing to God, Moshe is reassured that his mission will succeed. The Parsha closes with the foreboding divine message, "You shall soon see what I will do to Pharaoh." The Haftarah for this week is from the book of Isaiah, verses 27:6 to 28:13, and 29:22 and 23, beginning on page 343 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash and page 225 of the Hertz. Isaiah was a native of Jerusalem. His prophetic ministry extended for close to 40 years, from 740 to 701 BCE. The momentous event of this time was the rising of Assyria. The kingdoms of Syria and the northern kingdom of Israel fell before the Assyrians in 721 BCE, and only by a miracle was Jerusalem and the southern kingdom of Judah saved. With the downfall of the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah became the sole representative of true Jewish religion. In this time of upheaval, Isaiah brought to king and people the messages of holiness, omnipotence, and sovereignty of God. The connection between the Parsha and the Haftarah is the suffering of Israel in Egypt, who anxiously awaited redemption, yet grew tired of waiting for Moshe and Aharon to effect their freedom, versus the resistance of the people in Isaiah's time to the monotony of prophetical teachings and the doubting of the validity of the divine promise. The Egyptian deliverance revealed that justice triumphs in God's universe. So would the people at a later age see that the hand of God moves in the destinies of men. The prophetic message ends by looking forward to the future as a time of restoration when the people shall, by their lives, sanctify the Holy One of Jacob. Shabbat Shalom. Good Shabbos. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when we post new content, like, and please feel free to leave comments below. Thank you again. Shabbat Shalom.